Hello, and welcome to my most recent video. I'd like to thank you up front for taking the time to have a watch. So what we're looking at here today is a set of Vortex Diamondback HD 10 by 42 binoculars. This one happens to be the Optics Planet Special version, which they refer to as the OPMOD. The only difference between this and a normal pair of Diamondback 1042 binoculars is the color. I have a set of their 832s. This is just the regular green, dull green color. And this is the gray color. So that's really the only difference between these and the normal 1042 binoculars. But we're going to go ahead and move to the back of the binoculars here and have a look at the features. The first thing we're going to see here is our eye cups. These are adjustable. They have 3 positions. That's obviously the furthest in. There's the first detent, and there's the extended position. And these are good for setting the distance that you want to rest these against your face so that it can be consistent. You do want to make sure that you have both eye cups in the same position, because that will be awkward to try to look through those if they are not. But they have a nice rubbery finish, and they have a bit of a soft socket here on the back. It's got some squish to it, so that as it's resting against your face, it's not going to dig in and be really uncomfortable. They're actually quite comfortable to rest against your face. I've used these for extended periods of time on several occasions. But anyway, we'll move down here and look at this real quick. On this eye, the left eye, or excuse me, your right eye, you have your focus adjustment so that you can correct for any difference in vision between your right and your left eye, your left and your right eye. And in practice, what you want to do is set your left eye first by using the main focus wheel, and then you'll come over to your right eye and make the fine adjustment for your right eye so that it matches the focus on the left eye. You want to take a minute when you're out there in the field the first time you're using these, or really every time you're using them, to get that set, because it's going to reduce your eye strain considerably. If they're mismatched, you're really going to struggle and potentially end up with a headache. So that's worth a few minutes to get that dialed in properly. And as before, this is your main focus wheel. It also has a slightly rubberized finish, and what I like about it is it's very smooth. There's almost no difference in the tension. I mean, really, there's no difference in the tension all the way from one side to the other. Yeah, it makes no noise, doesn't grind, doesn't hang up anywhere, but it does have just a nice amount of tension so that you know you're moving it, but you can move that very precisely even with a small amount of pressure, which is good, because there are times when you just need to make a very slight adjustment, and that will allow you to do that. In front of that, we have our main knuckle that holds the 2 sides together. And the important function of the knuckle, aside from being, the structural point where the 2 connect, is that it allows you to set the correct distance between your eyes, which is referred to as your interpupillary distance. If you go to look up instructions on how to do that, that's the term you want to look up. And that's important because that's going to help you reduce the amount of overall shadowing that you're going to see around the edges. Because if you have it too wide or too narrow, when you have it perfectly behind one eye, you're probably going to see some crescent moon shape shadows in the other eye. Or if it's really out of place, you're going to have no view through the binoculars at all. So it's important to get that set properly as well. And then right at the front of the knuckle, we have a socket. It's 1/4-20, and that allows you to connect these to a tripod mount or a bipod mount, which is going to help you hold the binoculars a lot more steady if you're going to be spending a long period of time looking through them. Just that if you're holding them freehand, you're going to start to shake, and it's just going to make it harder to use the binoculars. Whereas if you have it mounted on something more rigid, whether it be like a window mount or, like I said, a tripod, that's going to allow you to sit behind the binoculars for long periods of time without having to worry about your hands shaking. It's supposed to have a little cap. I think I probably left it in my range bag. Looks like that one. It just screws in. and like I said, allows you to connect that to a mount of some kind. And then on the front, we have just our two lenses. They're made of glass, they're clear, they do lens things. The important thing that it does have is a very nice rubberized coating on the outside. I've found that even when my hands are sweaty or wet with rain or cold with snow, that these maintain a very nice grippy texture. I've never felt like they were loose in my hand, like I was going to drop them. They're really well sized for my hands, but mostly it's just that texture on there. And then on the bottom we have these little thumb scallops, which for me when I'm using them, that is pretty much exactly where my thumbs go. So, you know, on a smaller set like these ones, it's not quite as ergonomic, but these ones just fit my hands really well. And you know, everyone that I've borrowed these to has had a nice, comfortable feel. They haven't had any complaints. What else? Let's see. We got a couple of accessories that come in the box, which I no longer have the box because for some reason I threw it away. Probably because these things are almost never out of my car and I got tired of seeing the box sitting on the shelf. So you get a lanyard, which is a nice padded and has a little rubberized texture underneath. I use this all the time. I haven't felt the need to replace it. It does what it needs to do. If you were going to be, you know, hard using these, maybe you'd want to get an upgraded lanyard, but that one's worked out for me for the last several years. On the back, or for the back of the binoculars, we have a set of covers, and they have a pretty good amount of tension once they're on. You know, they'll support the weight. They're not going to just pop off by accident. I've had other binoculars where they were just sort of like barely on there and they would fall off all the time. These ones have just enough grip that they stay on pretty well. And those will be attached to your lanyard through this hole here. And then when you're not, when you need to take them off, they just will hang along out of the way with the lanyard. For the front, we have another set of covers. These ones slip on like this, scoot them back, and then the cap goes over the front. And when you're using them, they will hang down out of the way like that. I have had one of these get snagged and pull off before, but my solution for that was to put a piece of tape, sort of a thin piece of tape. You might, I don't know, I can see it, but there's a little line there where my tape was. I took it off for the review just because I didn't want them to have anything on them that they didn't have from the factory. So I'll have to replace those when I'm done. But anyway, you can put a little piece of tape on there, and then that will give that sort of just a bump, a hurdle to go over, and prevent those from pulling off. But anyway, they're a nice pair of covers. I've had them, like I said, I've had these binoculars for several years. They're not showing any signs of wear, or they look like they might tear off. So yeah, those are good. But I think that's probably all I'm going to need to say about these here. I will add a frame before or just after this little section that gives the physical dimensions and other stats of the binoculars. It's on the back of the box, but like I said, I don't have the box anymore, so I can't show it to you. Anyway, let's take these out to the floodplain and then see what they do, and then we'll come back and close this up. Alright, so I have us out here in the floodplain to take a look through these 10 power binoculars and just try to get an idea of what their limitations are and what they are capable of. So one thing I have to point out right away is that the blurring that you see towards the edge of our fields of view is an issue with the camera, not with the binoculars. Because I can focus, change the focus and the edge becomes clear, or I can change the focus and make the center extremely sharp. And I'm going to opt for the center being extremely sharp just because that's where you would be looking with your naked eye. Just know that with the naked eye, the edges are clearer, and I may add in a little bit of video towards the end of this where I use the ultra wide lens just to give you a more general sense of the total field of view. But for this segment, I'm going to focus on prioritizing the center of the field of view and looking at stuff, keeping things centered. I'm going to pan up here and look at these power transformers real quick.
You can see how much detail we can actually make out on those. The baffles, those are at about 175 yards. The building we were just looking at is at about 165 yards. So this is set just slightly further away. But we have no trouble making out quite a bit of detail on those transformers at this distance. But I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time looking at those because they are not far enough away to be interesting. So we're going to pan back down here a little bit, and we're going to scan to our right past our building. There it is again. Plenty of detail on that paint. We can see all the vent down there on the left side. Plenty of detail of the corrosion going on those stairs. Very nice image, very sharp. Very little chromatic aberration too. You'll notice that throughout the course of this video, that the chromatic aberration in these is extremely low, even up in those areas that are out of focus at the top of the bluff where the tree line is against the sky. Just these binoculars do a very nice job. Tweak that focus a little bit because now we've moved out to about 600 yards, but still we have very nice amount of detail. We can see those steps going up the right side there, the individual platforms on the stairs, even though they're not clearly in view because they're kind of obstructed by a little bit of the framing. That just kind of goes to show you the fine detail you can see. We can make out the guide wire going from the power pole down to the ground that holds it in place, and we can also make out the power lines traversing to the left going from the power pole back towards us actually a little bit. And then as far as those transformers themselves, we're seeing quite a bit of detail in those elements on the top, a little bit harder to pick out. If you were using these binoculars with your naked eye, you can make those out a little bit better just because your brain's getting, you know, twice as much information to work with. It's also going to depend on your, you know, individual eyesight. If you have extremely good eyesight, you're going to be able to see a little bit more just because of the nature of you having better eyes. One thing I do want to point out is our depth of field. So I'm going to cut in on the video here and do a little voiceover so that I can address the depth of field that I just previously mentioned. And as we settle here on the next building, we're going to want to take a look at the sharpness of the image all the way down here at the gravel road towards the bottom of our field of view, as well as the sharpness of the building out there at about 600 yards. And then if we look beyond that to the tree line at about 1400 yards, all of this is pretty well focused and sharp without having to do any adjusting of the actual focus wheel on the binoculars. And so while we do have more fisheye with this lens, it does give us a better idea of the total field of view and our depth of field for these binoculars. That's really all I want to say, and I will go back to the wide view. But let us continue on to the next one. Continuing to our right, we get to our next building. Now this one has a bright white rear face, so today's sunlight is going to kind of blind any of the finer detail that we might be able to see in that brickwork. Though we can see the seam between the base of the building and the top of the building. But what I want to look at in particular is just the detail that we can see in the grass and that little bush there to the left of the mound that the building is sitting up on top of. Looks pretty good. And then also the power pole behind the building. There's actually two there kind of sitting on top of each other. The transformers are behind the building, and there's actually a power pole between us and that building at about 600 yards. But if we look at the transformers themselves, we can still make out the individual transformers. We can tell that they are transformers and that there are two of them, and that is going to be at about 890 yards. So these are doing pretty darn good in my opinion. But we continue more. We go further, and as I'm going to pan slowly across here, and that tree line out there is going to be at about 1,350 to 1,400 yards. And then we're going to get over here to our last building, which is going to be about 1,450 to about 1,475. The trucks are about $14.75 because they're sitting actually behind the building. But the building itself, let me see if I can just make sure I get that focus as good as possible. We're going to be fighting with a little bit of distortion in the air today, a little bit of haze, or excuse me, a little bit of mirage. Ooh, we're going to get a truck crossing our field of view here. That truck is going to be right at about 1,100 yards. It crosses the center there. But in the distance at 1,450 yards, we can still make out where the handrails are going down on the right side of the building. We can still make out the individual transformers up there on the power pole, and we can see the bracing of the framework that supports the building. And overall, just, you know, if you were trying to observe animals at that distance to try to determine if they were, you know, bucks or does, given that they would be in the right time of the year to have a rack, or, you know, like something like a moose or an elk, you would definitely be able to identify those individual species at that distance and whether they were male or female. You'd also probably be able to pick out things as small as like coyotes fairly easily, or like dogs or something like that. But if you were looking at things like groundhogs, prairie dogs, those are probably going to be hard to distinguish at that distance with only a 10 power binocular. But, you know, if you had particularly good eyesight, you might be able to pull those out of the background or out of the grass and stuff, that if the grass and other things like that were short enough that they weren't completely obstructed. So we're going to continue to the right from here, and the next couple things are actually going to be closer, but I think they're going to give us a nice idea of the performance of these binoculars, because there's some, you know, just some things that people are generally more familiar with. Look at these trucks out here. Work on this exposure, try to tweak this just a touch. There we go. So those trucks are going to be right at about 1,000 yards, if I remember correctly. Let me measure them real quick. So the trucks are at 1,020 yards, and the building itself is going to be about 1,150. And I like this building because it sits more perpendicular to us, so we can see the individual rails of the handguards, but also the power pole, the individual transformers are separated left and right a little bit more clearly, so we can make those out. And then as far as those trucks, being able to see the wheels and the tires and distinguish the two of them from one another, and then just the high contrast of the window tint versus the white bodies, we just get a real sense of the lack of chromatic aberration in these binoculars. I think that's a really big selling point, is for the price that these sell for, and just the overall color quality and image that you get. They are extremely good value. But I think I'm going to cut this off here and go on back to the table and give you my final thoughts.
So now we're back at the bench, and it is time for me to give you my final thoughts and wrap up this video. First thing I'd like to say is who I think these binoculars are for. Personally, I bought them because I was looking for an upgrade to an old pair of Nikon Sporter binoculars that had gone out of alignment at the knuckle. The plastic body had either gotten hot or had something sitting on it for a while, and it was just warped, so that when you looked down the binoculars, they were not aligned, and it made using them extremely difficult. So when I was looking for a pair of new binoculars, I wanted something that had a metal body, or at least a metal structure inside that was going to keep it more rigid. So that was kind of like the first thing that drew me to these, was the magnesium frame that's underneath this coating. The next thing was I wanted something that had the newer, more quality coatings on the lenses, and that is what this also had. So to take a long answer and make it shorter, I think these are a great binocular for somebody who's either buying their first pair and doesn't want to go cheap, just as cheap as they can on Amazon special, and you want to get a good pair of binoculars that's going to last you a long time, and if you ever break them, they have a lifetime warranty. Also, I think they're for people who maybe have had binoculars in the past and are just looking for a quality upgrade from those cheap Amazon binoculars or eBay binoculars, or maybe just an old pair of binoculars that are, not serving you well anymore, but you don't want to break the bank getting a good pair of binoculars. I think these are an excellent choice. The fact that they, go on sale from anywhere from about $135 to $160 routinely throughout the year on either Amazon or places like Optics Planet or MidwayUSA.com. There's plenty of places where you can get these. They may not be this color. They may be, the green color of the traditional Diamondback binoculars, but that's just a preference. If you want one color or the other, you're just, you can make that decision for yourself. I don't know that there's much more to say about it than that, other than that I have been extremely pleased with these binoculars. They have been on numerous road trips over the last 3 years, twice to Alaska, for hiking, and just out in the winter time during deer season, during the middle of the summer at the shooting range, and on just hiking trips. I mean, they've seen all the weather you can imagine and have given me zero trouble. And I think that's the best endorsement that I can give for these binoculars, is just that I use them just as a daily, take them with me, put them in a backpack, break them out. I don't think about like babying them. I don't beat on them, but I'm not, just handling them with kid gloves, and they have had zero issues. The other fun fact about having a good pair of binoculars is that if you do go on a trip somewhere, where there's scenic views, and you're the guy with a nice pair of binoculars, you're gonna make friends, because people, for whatever reason, perhaps because they don't want to spend the money or don't see the value, lots of people don't bring a nice pair of binoculars when they go to places where there's a good use for them. And if you have a nice pair of binoculars to share with other people, you're gonna be the hero of the day, which I found out on multiple occasions when I was in Alaska doing a little bus tour, where there'd be things that were 1,000+ yards from the bus, and people couldn't see them with their naked eye, or in a couple of cases where people bought really cheap 6 and 8 power binoculars, and the image just wasn't even clear enough to see it. They hand them these, and they were just completely shocked at how nice of a view they could get through these binoculars. So I may have sold a few pair of these for Vortex throughout my travels, but I don't think I'll see any royalties. With that said, I'm going to finish this video and tell you thank you if you've made it this far, and go ahead and hit that like button if you feel like it, and leave a comment if you have any experience with these yourselves, or just any thoughts or any questions. I'm more than happy to answer questions if you guys have them. One other thing, there is still for sale the Gen 1 of these binoculars, so when you go to look for these, if you choose to, if you want to buy these, or any of the Diamondback HD variations, make sure you're getting the ones that specifically state that they are the HD version of the binocular, because the classic or Gen 1 version of these binoculars is still for sale on multiple outlets, and you don't want to be disappointed because you got the wrong ones. But anyway, that's the last thing I'm going to say. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.
Problem with these 10 power binoculars is finding stuff at close distances, especially things that are moving quickly. Oh. Guess this is a case of 2 in the bush. Anyway, so those birds are at about 30 yards, sitting on that stick. If I can just move just a little bit. Get those guys in. Well, they've flown off. So back